my name is Erica Farmer. I'm the co-founder and business director from Quantum Rise Talent Group. We work with the sector and support with great online training, teaching, lecturing, as well as content, as well as thought leadership. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is a provocative, pokey review around digital learning. What have we learned over the last couple of years? What is the gap for us to go further with? How can we take things from good to great? What support is out there? And it's going to be interactive, like Mandy says, so time to get your thinking caps on a little bit as well. So I've got a background in corporate learning and development, 20 years with some of the UK's largest brands, such as British Gas as an employer provider, Specsavers, LV, and also Virgin Care as an employer provider. I chaired the customer service apprenticeship Trailblazer Group when iPhone didn't even exist. It was back in the days when DFE did it all. So there's been quite significance there. And we're starting to move into the HE arena, working with Mandy and the team as well to understand some of the challenges there as well. Sunday, I did my first TEDx, so I'm going to share with you some of the stuff from that as well. So if you're on LinkedIn, it would be great to connect, and we share a lot of free resources, papers, things like that as well. So, if you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me ask this question, but if you haven't, this is when the interactivity comes in. So, what I'd like you to think about is, according to the World Economic Forum, what percentage of 5 to 11-year-old school children who are at school right now are going to go into a job that doesn't even exist yet? So if you think it's up to 20%, put your hand up. Up to 30% of school-aged children, put your hand up. Okay, we've got a hand at the back of the group. 30%? 40%? Oh, we're starting to get brave. 50%? Yeah, let's go middle ground to be safe. 60%? Anything else after 60%? Yeah, absolutely. So 2 out of 3, the figure's about 65%. So your future apprentices who are at school right now are going to need the types of future skills going into future work that doesn't even exist yet. Just wrap your head around that and think about, okay, so what does that mean in terms of our skills strategy? What does that mean in terms of where we're going with digital learning? How are you mapping out your next 5 to 10 years in regards to the needs of the workforce, and what does that mean? So, this again is from the World Economic Forum. Well, much has been said about the need to reform in basic education. It's simply not possible to weather the current technical revolution, but just waiting for the next generation just to become better prepared. So what the WF is saying is, we can't just expect Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whatever comes after that, to rock up. And we know they're going to be digital natives, but what comes with that is a much more higher level of expectation. So how do we meet the needs? How do we exceed the needs? How do we become an establishment or an institution or a school or a uni or whatever it is that attracts those kind of people? How are they going to want to learn? So these are the things that we have conversations about on a regular basis at Quantum Rise. But interestingly, according to the BBC last year, complaints at British universities rose by 31%. And you can kind of excuse that pandemic. Yeah, we kind of went into this panagogy rather than pedagogy. It was panicking rather than online response to teaching and learning. And when probed further, 92% of those students said that was down to the poor quality of online teaching and learning. That's BBC research, and that's really relevant. So we're doing our damnedest to step forward. We're working hard, we're working with UVAC and different organisations to think about what is that digital framework that we need to think about. How do we curate, create, design, deliver a learning experience that people want to come back for, that people love, that they're really engaged and interact with? How do you set up your teachers and your lecturers and your professors and your tutors and everybody else to design and deliver learning that has that kind of effect? Because we've got a little bit of a way to go according to that research. But actually, is that fair? Because we've all worked really hard over the last couple of years. But again, think about, what does your 5-year strategy look like, your 10-year strategy, the WF Forum? And how does that make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success? Well, a shift needs to happen. And it's not all about content is king. We're moving away from content is king, and engagement is the new kid on the block. And do you know what? It's here to stay. That's what people are looking for. Engage me in every process of my learning journey, so I want to be involved, I want to apply it. I want to go through my apprenticeship, whether that's on the job learning, off the job learning, in the workplace, in the virtual classroom. So again, let's switch it into learner experience, because effectively that's our product. That's what we're here to deliver. And I know there's a real scale in how we think about that, probably in the room and online as well. So let's just think about some outdated methodologies. Gamification. It can be a bit cheesy for some people if you're running leaderboards in your online systems. I've got some smiles around the room already, some online certificates, you get like a little digital badge. It had its time, but actually that's probably for us millennials that were interested in that stuff. We've moved on since then. So what does that mean to your systems and your e-learning you're building? Is everything classroom-based? You've probably got a bit of a blended delivery style going on at the moment. And yes, there is absolutely a time for classroom-based learning. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater by any means whatsoever. But actually, what does that mean for our digital requirements going forwards? Are we truly supporting blended learning or hybrid learning? Or actually, do we just put a platform up for those that can't make the classroom and they get a bit of a dodgy experience because the tech's not right or the audio doesn't work? Yeah, people are nodding away. Absolutely. So you know what I'm talking about. You've been there, you've felt that. But this is new stuff, and we don't know what we don't know. So that's why we're here to share and learn and curate this information. This next one might be a bit of a rub, but long gone is the need for the big programmatic response, which is kind of 5 weeks residential end-to-end training, because people just can't concentrate for that long anymore. Particularly if you're like me, grew up with hyperactivity, very short concentration span. You know, there's a lot of us who are more neurodivergent now coming through in the workforce and understanding the impact of what that means. I could never sit in a classroom for 5 weeks solid. You wouldn't get a lot out of me, to be honest. Maybe first couple of days, and then I'd run out of steam. So what we're talking about here is learning in the flow of work. So creating micro-learning that sits within the job place. Yes, it's still your off-the-job hours. Don't worry about that. But actually, how do I know when I need that learning and how I can access it at the right time and the right place and then go and apply it straight away? Because we know if you don't apply learning within a certain time scale, it starts to degrade. We all know the theories and the models that sit behind this. But sometimes there's a little bit of a gap in our design methodology and our delivery methodology that feels that really kind of sits in that space. And it's because, you know, we've got a way of doing things. We have a mindset about learning and education, and that's okay. But as we were talking about earlier, you know, the pace of change is as quick as it's ever going to be, and it's as slow as it's ever going to be right now. So what I'm saying is things are going to get quicker, more digital, more agile, and we need to think about how do we respond in that space as well. Purely online conversational learning. So what we saw in the emergency response to online, nearly 3 years ago now, is that we picked up what we did in the classroom or the lecture theatre and we plonked it onto Zoom and Teams. Yeah? With me? Yeah, Evan's nodding away. But actually there's a different pedagogy to this space. It's not just, let's have a conversation for 90 minutes and I'll stick you into breakout rooms and then go and have another conversation and come back and debrief. Yeah, seeing smiles in the room again. This is what we do because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know that there's another way. But actually, do you know, breakout rooms and that kind of conversational piece is about 20% of the opportunity that you've got in the live virtual classroom. You've got 80% of other stuff, tools, techniques, engagement, resources, way of delivering learning that really gets into different types of learning preferences. Your introverts as well as your extroverts. Those who don't want to put the cameras on. That's okay. You know, there's a way that we can deal with that and facilitate that to a really great learning outcome. If you don't believe us, come and have a chat with us later, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it. Chapter-based e-learning. Who here has got e-learning as part of their blended delivery model? Hand up, who uses e-learning? I'm sure lots of you in the room do. Yeah, absolutely. So what we see in e-learning is a load of content might sit on Articulate Rise or something like that. And then you might have a video if you're lucky, and then you've got an assessment at the end of it, where you need to get like 80% or something like that. You often see it in compliance type learning and stuff like that. How boring is that? Yeah? There is a different way to building scenarios to get people critically thinking about the decisions that they make or that they would make in the real world. So don't just throw a load of content and a load of words at people. Get them working harder. Get your students and your apprentices really think about, what if I was a senior leader, what would I do in that space? If I was coaching, which question would I ask at that point? Yeah, so there's a way to build digital learning that's flexible, personalised, adaptive. And these are things we should be thinking about now. Content theory heavy, I've covered this a little bit, but we all know the theory about cognitive overload. So if you have a pint at the bar and you keep the tap running, the beer's just going to eventually pour out. You can't put more beer into a glass that's not going to take it. This is the same theory around how people take in information. You've got to help them move that information from the short-term working memory into the long-term memory. And by getting people to adapt flexibly and doing things on a regular basis to apply, that's how that becomes a new skill and a new habit. You guys know this already. Sometimes there's a gap between what we should be doing and what we are doing. And this is what we talk about with outdated methodologies. Simply being remote isn't modern learning. It's the pedagogy and the understanding and the science of how the brain takes on learning in the online space, which is the real difference here. And how about letting learners choose how they learn best? And I'm not talking about VAC, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, because that's another space in itself, isn't it? A debate on its own. But I'm thinking about, how do you learn as a learner? How long can you sit in front of a screen for? How long can you sit in a classroom for? What kind of information am I taking it in, and how am I taking it? How does my brain work? My brain works slightly different to perhaps how other people's brains work. So it's around thinking about that, and that's when we talk about engagement and interaction and personalization should be some of the principles that you're starting to think about, because that's the demand of the workforce that's coming through, that 65% that we talked about earlier. So, who here delivers synchronous learning? So kind of happening at the same time, whether it's a virtual classroom or, yeah, people nodding away, absolutely. Your principles are engagement and interaction. If you don't have engagement and interaction, there's no point having any content, there's no point delivering. Because again, people want to consume and use the information and the skill that you're working with. You can absolutely do that in the online space, in a virtual classroom, in a webinar, as long as it's facilitated and designed in the right way. So we see quite a lot in corporate, we work with corporate quite a lot, for trainers who just impart knowledge, or tutors who are talking at, or I've got to get all this stuff on a slide because I need to talk through it. You know, but there's another way. You've got to just switch people off. Remember, we think about that cognitive overload. What am I actually going to go and do with this information? How do I need to take it on board? So if you take anything away today, think about reviewing your live learning and score it against engagement and interaction, because that's what people need. That's how they're going to be able to build a new skill base. Asynchronous, so if you're doing digital content, e-learning, that kind of stuff. Flexibility and adaptation. So the way we build our e-learning is it adapts to the need of the learner as they go. So I can choose to read, I can choose to listen, I can choose to write, I can do whatever I want based on my environment, my mood, my need. Again, it's learner-centered, learner-focused, rather than just throwing content at a wall and expecting to get something like a Jackson Pollock. You might get a load of paint on a wall, you might get some patterns, but that's probably as close as you're going to get. So just think about, what's the end experience? What are my principles when it comes to best practice learning and design? And we talk about the learner being at the heart of everything, or the apprentice being at the heart of everything, but what does that really mean for you and your institution, or your apprenticeship programs, or your certificates, or your degrees? I love this quote. I found this quite recently on LinkedIn. So this is a professor from New York University talking at the Higher Education World Education Summit. And what he said, and I think this is a bit of a rabbit hole that we do tend to fall down when it comes to digital learning. With EdTech, we need more of a focus on modifying tools that are already used to aid collaboration, rather than chasing the next big thing. So you'll see quite a lot online, perhaps on LinkedIn. You probably started to hear a lot. You might have experienced virtual reality, metaverse, all this kind of stuff. And by the way, the metaverse doesn't exist yet. It's being trialed by Meta and Silicon Valley. What you probably see is virtual reality programs. But we're still not there in terms of cost. Not everybody has great internet access still. We've taken big steps forward. But this isn't about just going from zero to hero. This isn't about going straight into virtual reality. This is thinking about how do I build confidence in our delivery team to facilitate and use tech in the right way. And then actually, you might get into virtual reality in the meta space. That might be your, the metaverse. That might be your 5-year plan. But what's your 12-month plan? What's your 3-year plan, for example? I thought that was a great quote. And he goes on to say, when we're thinking about implementing technology to support online education, particularly for undergraduates, the first big thing we learned is innovation is overrated and execution is underrated. Yeah, so again, what's your execution strategy? What's your design and delivery? Are you designing for online, or have you picked up what you used to do and plonked it into the online space? Have you put a load of content into Articulate Rise and thought that's done because we've covered that part of the KSBs? So I'm just trying to get you to challenge yourselves a little bit, just to think about what's your strategy and is it future-proof? And actually, what's your plan A, your B, your C, your D, and your E? Because actually, what we would say is start from digital as default. Think about that as your plan A, because there's only one way that change is going. There's only one way employer skills are going. Employers are already looking for people with experience with robotics, machine learning, automation. If you look at the World Economic Forum's top 5 skills, critical thinking, agile learning, creativity, and you'll be building a lot of this into what you deliver already. But again, it's around the mechanism of how it's delivered and what does great teaching and learning in the online space look like. We might have, there we go, let's just go back one. So what I'm asking you to do is leapfrog. I'm asking you to benchmark where you are right now through your observations of teaching and learning, understanding what that student experience, that apprenticeship experience looks and feels like. Some of you in the room have recently gone through apprenticeships as senior leaders. How does that feel? Is it what you'd expect? And actually benchmark that right now and think about where we are in the next couple of years. And call for help. If you're a bit stuck in some of this stuff, go online, speak to experts, come and have a conversation with us, speak to other people in the room that do this really well already, because there will be people already thinking about this stuff. You see it online all the time. And that can be outside of the HE sector, by the way. We've got some corporate clients that are already thinking ahead in a lot of this stuff. But don't make it gimmicky. We've got a corporate client in themselves that just wants to put everything into their version of the metaverse. And when you ask the question why, they can't really give you an answer. Because it just looks good, because it's different, because there's novelty. Let's strip it back. It's still about new skills, behaviours, learning, knowledge, etc. So what does that mean in terms of your leapfrog and where you're going with that strategy? So when you're creating digital learning, what are your principles? What's your framework that's going to help you go from good to great? Well, I've talked about some of this stuff already. I'd argue, and this is what my TEDx was about on Sunday, to start with a digital-first mindset. And that can be a little bit scary when you first think about it, but what I mean by that is, you're at home, you need to do some washing, and suddenly there's an error code flashing on the washing machine. What do? Well, some people will call a washing machine engineer and borrow next door's washing machine, but actually you could Google the error code and probably fix it yourself by pressing some buttons in a certain order. So that's what I mean by digital first. What's our digital first response? Digital can work on and off the job. And this can work with things like bring your own device. So more and more we're seeing people want to access their learning through their devices, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, whatever it might be. Now I understand security, firewalls, all the other stuff that might get in the way. But this thinking allows you to start to challenge and ask the question, what if? What if we could enable people to do that in a certain way? What if we could give people the power and control of their own learning? We don't need to be the controllers and the governors of everything when it comes to this. But historically, I know in the L&D sector from our background, we've been that controller of learning, and we've been a little bit scared to let go because we're worried about the quality. And what does it mean if a learner takes control and it's not quite how we would do it? But you know what, that's okay, because they're owning their learning, they're owning that journey, and they're more likely to implement it. We hear a lot about accessibility and inclusion, and I've already started to talk about being neurodiverse. But we know, particularly in corporates and large employers, that's such an important drive. So you can build digital learning that supports the needs of people in different spaces. Even on things like Microsoft Teams now, you can change the language, you can subtitle, you can provide a transcript. You know, it doesn't have to be one way of forcing content at people. There's lots of technology that's already available for us. Upskill teaching and design. Invest in the people that are designing and delivering and are front-facing to your apprentices and your students, because that is the experience that they're obviously getting. That's the connection, is with the tutor, or is with the assessor or the learning practitioner or the professor. And they should be excited about those learning experiences. So we're experts in our field, and it's important to be able to teach the content, but are we thinking about what that means in the online space? I kind of talked about the rest already, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But again, there's lots of information there. Go away and think, what does that mean to us? And actually, there's a piece there that we're doing that piece really well already. But we could think about this piece. Or who do we know that does that piece really well? Let's go and have a conversation with them. What could we learn? Think about doing things differently. It's a collaborative sector. Let's look outside of the sector. Let's go and talk to corporate L&D. Let's go and talk to charities. Let's go and talk to ITPs and colleges. Everyone's got a similar challenge in this space, and it's around sharing that best practice. And ultimately, you know, what we see a lot of people do is reading and talking and talking and reading and putting lots of information, lots of resources online, whether that's a live session, whether that's a one-to-one session. But fundamentally, from a biological perspective, our memories won't let us listen and read at the same time. So have you ever been in that space where you've been reading a book and someone starts talking to you and you read the same paragraph over and over and over again because you haven't quite taken it in? So understanding key principles around how our brains work will allow us to build the jigsaw in a slightly different way. And growing confidence for your designers and your deliverers in this digital space is based on these kind of fundamental principles. So it's not rocket science, it's just understanding digital in a slightly different way. So I'm asking you to explore the art of the possible. I'm asking you to think about what does that mean for your apprentices that you have right now, but also your apprentices of the future, that 65% 5 to 11-year-olds that are in school right now. So future-proof. Talking about future-proofing, and again, I've talked a lot about all this stuff already. Post-pandemic, people are looking for personalisation. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my home-life balance? What does it mean for my career mobility? What does it mean for my learning? Can I curate my own learning with resources that you make available to me so you become a facilitator of learning rather than a teacher of learning? Slightly controversial, but again, think about what does that mean from a HE perspective, because that's where a lot of this stuff's going in terms of command and control over to empowerment and ownership. Again, I've covered some of that stuff, so I'm not going to keep on. And we know Web 3.0 is coming. So we know that there's going to be a lot of change coming from Web 1.0, when you remember the dial-up of the internet, you might have had an AOL account. I've still got an email AOL account hidden away somewhere, which means that like the first internet was you would go on and you'd look for Britannia Encyclopedia because you'd be looking for some information. Web 2.0 became platforms and Silicon Valley and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all these organizations owning your information. Web 3.0 is going to obliterate a lot of that because it's going to decentralize the ownership of information through things like the blockchain. So think about 24 access to content. Think about qualifications sitting on the blockchain. We're already seeing that. So my coaching accreditation with the EMCC, it sits on the blockchain, which means that actually I own that piece of content and it's a universal ledger for everyone that can be moved around. So if you haven't started looking into Web 3.0, it's definitely worth looking at that. Also think about the systems that you're using and how are they going to respond to this stuff, because you're going to have a think about that stuff. Pace and demand I've talked about a little bit. But again, and feel free to take a picture of that slide if that's interesting, because there's lots of things we can go away and have a think about. Change is on its way, whether we like it or not. So my final ask is that you create digital learning opportunities for your learners which inspire, motivate and build the opportunities not just to learn, but to go and do. Because that's how we build those new skills, and that's how the difference is going to be for the demand of the workforce of the future. And we do that through the digital first mindset. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Erica. That's really, really, really inspiring.